Welcome to the Guidelines podcast. The following is a conversation with Sam Harper, UX career coach and founder of Conscious Career Shift. Near the end of 2020, Sam released an article titled 10 Sobering Realities Every Brand New UX Designer Needs to Accept. This article really hit a nerve with the UX community, being featured on the UX Collective, and I highly recommend giving it a read. On this episode, we're going to focus in on 5 specific points from this article. Enjoy. For Guidelines, we usually start off with an introduction. People will know you as the author of 10 Sobering Realities Every Brand New UX Designer Needs to Accept. This article was recently featured on the UX Collective in the second half of 2020. But I'd like to let you introduce yourself. Sam, welcome to the podcast. And can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me, Jonathan. Yeah, so my name is Sam. I'm a UX designer in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm a frequent contributor to Medium. I'm also a UX career coach, and the reason why I came up with this article in particular is because I get a lot of people who connect with me on LinkedIn. What I'll do is at the end of every one of my articles, I actually put a link to my LinkedIn podcast, to my LinkedIn article, to my LinkedIn page, and I say, hey, if you like this article, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I get a lot of people connecting with me. And I notice that everybody seems to be asking the same questions, about like, what kind of boot camp should I attend? What kind of, these are my expectations coming into UX. And I've noticed that everyone was kind of asking the same thing. And from that gave me an idea that, everybody is actually facing very similar problems when they're coming into UX. And how can I best write about that to help people like level their expectations, and then also to really like set the tone for what these people are asking in the first place. And that's usually where a lot of my content comes from.
Okay, fantastic. So you, in addition to writing these articles and making your knowledge available to the community, you also have a day job. So you work at Entrata. Could you tell us about what the day-to-day life of a UX designer looks like?
Yeah, so I would say it really depends on like where you're working. So before I came to Entrata, I was actually working full-time at agencies, which basically mean, they were web agencies. So essentially what that means is that imagine if you work for a company that does like contract work for, Nike and like all these other, ranging from like little mom and pop shops to like Walmart. Essentially, they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, we've got this issue with our site, or like we just, it could range from like, we just want you to do this little usability study to like, we want a fully redesigned site. And so you and your team will essentially then work on that, get it out the door. So client's happy, then you move on to the next one. Sometimes you're working with like 2 or 3 projects in tandem. It's very fast paced. It's agency life is not for the faint of heart. Part of that, like I'm actually happy that my current role is actually an in-house software role where you are just, instead of working for like Nike and Walmart and like all these other companies and just doing this little like doing these projects for them, now you're just working at one company and just working on their stuff. So I'm in an in-house software role right now. So we essentially help property managers to manage their units more effectively. In my current job, I mean, again, I just started like a few weeks ago, but so far it's been a lot of user testing. It's been, I eventually see like once we've got that, we're essentially just doing a lot of this user testing on our software to figure out, how we can make these certain areas better, what's gonna work better for our customers. That would eventually lead into like more user testing, and then like some mock-ups of designs, and then testing those mock-ups, and just rinsing and repeating until we've got some really solid directions for where their software can move into.
You also say that you work as a UX career coach. I haven't heard of that before. Please tell me what that looks like and what kind of services you offer and how people could possibly get in touch with you with regard to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as UX career coaching, there's actually quite a bit of people who are doing this. So these are individuals who are like, they've been UX designers for at least a few years, or if not more. And they're basically just like helping say like new junior UX designers to essentially get to that point that they need to be in their career, to land that first job, to be able to get like further faster in their career than they might be getting, maybe because they're not getting mentorship. It's really just basically about like helping a lot of these new UX designers is what I do. To get in touch with me, I would say just like contact me on LinkedIn, and we'll go from there. I'm still setting out my landing pages and everything, so it's not perfect.
Okay, cool. Well, dude, it's really great to have you on. As I mentioned during the introduction period, it's really like I love what you're doing. And I think that you've added a lot of value to the UX community already with the 10 sobering realities. But you've also sent me some other links to some other articles you've wrote. So I look forward to reading the rest of your articles, and I hope to read more, possibly long form articles from you in the future, and maybe a book. Today, we're going to be really digging into one of your articles, which is, as I mentioned, the 10 sobering realities every brand new UX designer needs to accept. There have been 5 specific points that have really resonated with me, and that resonated with my community and my context that I'd love to dig into a bit later. But first, I'd like to chat about the current reality. And you could almost consider this as the introduction to this article. I want to pull out one specific part, and I'd like to just ask you a couple of questions relating to it. So you say here in the article, however, there are a ton of hard truths that anyone even thinking about this field needs to accept. And it's not nearly as rosy as it's made out to be. Could you just position why you wrote this article and why you think there is a need for these kind of basic hard truths have to be shared online?
Absolutely. So, really, the reason why I came up with this is because you hear from a lot, whether it's from Business Insider, or you hear it from these boot camps from their marketing material, or you hear it from, sometimes even from these UX career coaches. They will say, like, oh, tech and UX design in particular is a great field to get into. You're going to make 100K right off the bat. It's going to be so happy and so fun, and you're just going to be playing in these like startup like environments. And it's, I'm not going to say that there aren't like certain elements of truth to those, but I've noticed that it's very over exaggerated to the point where it gives people unrealistic expectations. And they almost think that it's an easy way out of some other career that they studied for that they don't like. Really, what I wanted to write about is like, no, this is a good field to be in, but it's like any other field in a lot of ways. Like, you do have to work hard. There's going to be times where you're not going to be making much money. There's times where you're going to want to pull your hair out and like scream because you're just so frustrated. I really wanted to just like dispel a lot of those myths that I think people are bombarded with, so they can have a more balanced opinion, not to turn them off from UX design, but to say, hey, look, you heard a lot of these great things about UX, but this is what I've observed about it. Some of what you're hearing, in my opinion, is not exactly true. So I want to give my take on that.
I love how you end off that introduction and you say that knowing your limitations quite well will benefit you in the long run. So although some of it might be a bit uncomfortable and it might seem like, oh, flip, I'm not going to go straight into a 6-figure salary working at Google or Apple, but actually knowing these things and not just going in with an uninformed perspective is actually helpful to you in the long run. Ignorance is not bliss.
Absolutely. Knowledge is bliss, even if it's painful.
One of the things that you mentioned during the introduction of your article is this perception that there's quite a low bar to entry to get into the field of UX. Some of the marketing material will say that tech companies will be scrambling over each other to throw money at you and to want to bring you onto their team once you graduate. Anyone can do extremely well within this field. It exaggerates this thing of there being a lot of demand for brand new UX designers. Is this something that you've seen within your time within the industry, and do you think that it's true and helpful?
Absolutely. So yes, I have seen this quite a bit, where there's a lot of people who just like, they hear that you just have to do a 12-week boot camp, and the bar to entry is just set at such a low standard. Like, you just have to take this online course, you just have to do this 12-week boot camp. The truth is that there are some elements of being a UX designer that are really like absolutely critical. You have to be able to look at data, you have to be able to understand analytics of how people are behaving. You have to be able to think critically and question what you're looking at and test and retest. You have to be able to You have to be able to come up with designs that actually further the business. Uh, a lot of people forget that, they forget your number one client, which is actually, it may be the users, and you hear that term a lot, but it's the big part of it is it's actually the company that hired you in the first place. They are a big user. So, you know, you're not getting paid to essentially just playing around in a virtual sandbox and just, make a button a certain way so that people will convert over faster. It's like, that's fine, but how does that help the business? It's individuals like that they forget about who they're designing this for, or like why they're in this business. And it's not to, it's not because they want to, just because they want to like play around and have fun. It's like, because you're getting hired to essentially do a job. Sometimes you'll get the wrong people in this field who just think that UX is graphic design, and that because this was a low bar to entry, that it's just going to be, you can just do this little certificate and then it'll be easy.
Do you see it as being a low bar to entry in your experience with working in companies? Are companies just hiring?
There's a disconnect. What I'm going to say is, like, I think that there's a disconnect between the low bar to entry to the material that people are trying to sell, whether it's coaching or whether it's the UX boot camps, or whether it's like these online classes that teach you how to become a UX designer, and what the industry wants. Industries want seasoned UX designers, especially UX managers is actually the big one that they're looking for. And unfortunately, these boot camps and essentially this, a lot of this material that people are trying to sell you, it's saying that no, you don't need experience, you just need to like take these courses and then you're good to go. Really, what I would tell people who are genuinely interested in UX design, who have read my articles and still say, yes, this is where I want to be, what I would say is, like, just go out there and start making real life projects. That's what's going to distinguish you, not this theoretical stuff. Theoretical stuff is like, it's like the difference between writing on the teacups in Disneyland versus the real world stuff that's like being in a live version of Mad Max. They're so different. And if UX design is for you, go out, do stuff in the real world, test it with real people, like, get your hands dirty, fall down. That's important. How do you handle these situations that go sideways is a big thing that I think companies really want to see. Like, how do you recognize these limitations? How do you deal with these imperfect world scenarios that you just cannot get with theoretical projects?
Okay, that's fantastic. And with that, I'd like to head into the first of the points that I've cherry picked from your article. I've picked five, so I really would encourage listeners to go and read the rest and go and read and enjoy this article. But the first point is, you are not yet the ideal candidate that companies want. Basically, what you're saying in this section is that although you may be very excited and you may be very ambitious and passionate about design, about UX, you've done this course, you've studied university, and you realized actually this could be a good fit for me. You're gonna have to go through a period of sort of earning your stripes first. And you haven't arrived, and you're not as good as you think you are just yet. Could you tell me a bit about this first point of you are not yet the ideal candidate that companies want to hire?
Absolutely. So as far as that goes back to what we were talking about previously. So when you come out of a boot camp, you don't really have generally any experience in real world experience in UX design. And these companies do want usually between 3 to 5 years of experience. Again, because they want you to be proven in the real world. They want you to be able to handle these situations that go sideways. They want to know that you can work well with a team. And what I think is really interesting, I remember watching a leadership video that was talking about it was like this experiment where they had a bunch of people who they asked them to do a specific task, and then would you just ask a whole group of people and nobody's doing it, guess what's going to happen? They're not going to do it until you finally get that one person who might be this was like an activity they did at like a summer camp. They asked them to like climb over a log or something, and then like one of the individuals finally went over, and then guess what? the whole group sees it and they're like, oh, that person did it. Now I won't feel as awkward if I go do it. So then the second person goes, and then the third person goes. And it kind of gives like the group the confidence to be able to essentially complete this task. It's the same thing. I feel that it's the same thing when you're going out into the market for the first time and you're trying to convince people to take a risk on you. You know, you initially there's going to be that hesitation. People are going to be like, "Oh, this person's new. I don't know if I necessarily want to like touch them, bring them on my wrist on my team because they are new people are high risk candidates. As much as that probably sucks to hear it, it's it's not going to be doing you any favors if I sugarcoat this. So brand new UX designers usually are high risk or they're seen as high risk because nobody's really taken a risk on them in this UX role. They don't know if they're not going to be a good fit or anything like that. So again, this ties back to really, first off, like I was saying, like have as much real world experience as possible, something that you can show that says, hey, this was out in the real world. I was testing this. I was thinking like a UX designer. Uh, and also, and I wrote another article that was called how to dramatically increase your chances of getting your next job, even if you have no experience. I would read through that as well. That talks about the value add projects in very, very in depth as to how you can increase your chances. Yeah, it's really when you're in that stage of being a new UX designer, your job is essentially to bridge that gap between I just graduated and I am qualified for this junior mid-level role, whatever you're trying to get into.
I love the way that you phrased it. I've never heard someone describe a candidate as being high risk, but I think it's actually quite a helpful way of thinking about it. Sometimes when people are looking for jobs, they'll be like, "Oh, like it's so difficult to get a job and to get a role in UX." But you're not thinking about as you mentioned earlier, that the business is a user and that the business has certain needs, and it almost it depersonalizes it, where it's actually like actually you are a high risk candidate because they don't know whether hiring you, paying your salary, doing all the other admin that it takes that is associated with hiring someone, going through that whole process of hiring you, there's a risk that it might not work out. And if you have no track record, they could be spending a lot of money, a lot of time. Who's to say also that, I mean, it's not just the money that would go into you as a person, but also the money that they maybe spent on a project that you during your learning phase botch. So you need to build up this sort of foundation to show that actually I am not high risk, or that I am less high risk. I'm the risk that you are looking for.
Yes, exactly. Every hire is going to be a risk, but what's really important for the person who is trying to land their first role is to essentially like lower that risk factor as much as possible. Show them that you are a solid, safe choice. Again, it's probably not going to be perfectly, completely safe, but bring in these examples from like your previous career if you don't have any current UX experience. Show that you have done UX in the real world. Show that you have dealt with these not so perfect situations, that you can pivot, that you can adjust, that you can work on teams. That's, I mean, again, like even if it's just like a little internship you did, like that's better than nothing.
Mm. I guess that leads us straight into point two then. How do you reduce your risk? How do you make yourself as marketable as you can be to prospective employers? And your second point is you don't have a lot of bargaining power right now. Sam, how do we go about developing and accumulating this bargaining power when we're still very junior?
Yeah. So first off, what I want to say regarding that point is that you hear all the time about, I mean, I'm calling from the United States, and of course, San Francisco is our big, big tech market. So you get a lot of people who are saying, oh, I got to go out to San Francisco to get my UX career started. And the problem is like when you're trying to there's these tech markets that have like very I feel like they've got a pretty high barrier to entry. I don't want to speak like generally because I know some people do get their career started there, but for the most part there's a lot of like senior UX designers, people who are really really skilled in San Francisco, and it makes it difficult for these brand new UX people who are in like Toledo, Ohio, to go get a job in San Francisco. And it's, I wanted to hit home that point that when you're starting out, you don't really have the bargaining power to get that salary you're trying to get the to go in that particular geographic area. You got to start out somewhere, and at least like in my personal experience, I found that starting out in an area that was not as like strong of a tech scene. I actually got my first job in a little city called Knoxville in Tennessee, and that I mean they're not really known for like a very strong tech scene, but I got hired out there, got a couple of years of experience that gave me that bargaining power that I needed. So really what I'm going to say regarding this is like be open, be flexible. I often tell people imagine if you were offered a position, your first UX position, but it's out in the middle of nowhere. Let's say like it gets boiling hot in the summer and it gets freezing cold in the winter. There's not like a lot of people there. Your needs are met, but all of your desire, you're not going to be living in like Los Angeles or like some really nice city, but you're getting UX experience. Would you do that? That's that's actually like a very good way that I can use to determine whether how serious someone is to breaking into this market. I've posed that question to people who said yes, I absolutely would, and I say great. That's your first step. uh, and similarly, I've talked to people who are like, no, actually, I just want the six-figure salary and to live in San Francisco, and if I can't have that, then screw it. And those are the people who I personally like. I would put a red flag on because again, like getting into UX, regardless of what anyone tells you, it's a process. You have to put in the work. You have to sometimes deal with these low salaries. You have to deal with shitty bosses. You have to. It's like I said, it's like any other job.
I think this thing of coming into industry and expecting that it's going to be incredible success right from the beginning and expecting that you don't need to pay your dues is you don't look at any other industry and see that happening. You don't look at law, engineering, or medicine. You don't look at those industries and see that people can jump right in from the beginning and within 1 to 5 years have ascended the ranks, become a senior level or a director or whatever, because they've had a couple of successful projects. No, people will develop skills over many, many, many years. What I'd like to do is I'd like to jump to the ninth point that you made. But before we do that, I want to read something. You say in your article that while there's nothing wrong with realizing that you don't like your current profession anymore, it is vitally important to stay humble and realize that you don't get to dictate the market. In fact, it is more of the opposite. So your ninth point says that don't become a UX designer just because you want to escape your previous career. And something that I've seen a lot of is people wanting to move into UX because they don't like the degree that they or the field that they are currently working in, and that UX almost becomes this promised land where you get incredible salaries, where you get to work remotely and manage your time, where you get to work on expensive computers, and it's like all of these things that get brought into it, but not often the actual day-to-day work gets brought into it. Could you speak to this thing of your ninth point, which is don't become a UX designer just because you want to escape your previous career?
Yeah, and again, the reason why I mention this is because in fact, the vast majority of people I see are actually coming into UX because they're changing careers. And I know that I know a lot of people will change careers just not necessarily because they're super excited about the previous career, but because they're unhappy with where they are. Um, in politics, you hear people say like they don't vote for the person they like, they vote against the person they hate. And I mean, as far as people they'll get out of like nursing and accounting degree fields because they didn't like where they were. But the problem is, if you're running away from something that wasn't working out for you, then who's to say that going to that new UX job is necessarily going to solve your problems? It doesn't. Like it's, you know, I've in my case, like my not all my problems have necessarily been solved by becoming a UX designer. I know that's the case for a lot of other people. Uh, it's if you're not happy with where you are, I say first, like, understand why are you not happy. Is it your coworkers? Is it the prospect? Like, and then probably try to make that work. And if you still cannot make that work, uh really evaluate, like, is this a field that is UX design really a field that you want to get into? Because you may, I don't know, maybe you'd be more happy as like a firefighter or like a teacher or something.
Yeah, I think it's important to try and evaluate whether something actually is a good fit for you, not just from the benefits that would come out of it. Um, are there any traits that come up that you think really exemplify what a UX designer should be? The kind of skills that you like to see within people who want to be moving into UX, or maybe some designers who you think of as being excellent designers. What traits do they exemplify? And what can people sort of assess within themselves to see whether they sort of have those?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is it's this really like this huge level of curiosity. So, and again, that for me, the way I interpret that is these are the people who are willing to look into problems and research and evaluate and then say, oh, we found this little interesting nugget of insight. We're going to do another test. Oh, we found this. We're going to start forming some hypotheses around these. We're going to keep testing it. We're going to put out a prototype. One of my former bosses said that the best UX designers are those annoying kids that would just constantly ask why when they were young. I would say like the best skill that I see in UX is the people who are really willing to dive in deep and really understand like what is the problem they're trying to solve and actually move towards solving it. It's not about pretty design. It's not about put it's not about like making a button look nicer, making an interface look nice or anything. People confuse UI and UX all the time. Uh, for me, it's about, can this person ask the right questions? Can they move in the direction that the business or the product they're working on needs to move into?
I was working on a healthcare project beginning of this year, and the senior designer I was working at said, well, congrats, you now need to become an expert on this particular product within healthcare. And suddenly we had to research everything to do um, with sort of inventory management solution. I was like, actually, like, congrats, you now need to become an expert on everything that there is to possibly know about inventory management solution. So it's not just about like making things look good. It's about really understanding the core of the problem, understanding the core of your users' needs, understanding the core of the business needs and why they're positioning this product. It's really been able to go deep. So I agree with what you're saying. Good UX is not just about flying on the surface level. It's about being able to become obsessed with a problem and to be really like digging into, like, looking for solutions, and not just trying to sort of fix things on a high level, because you can't, there's no ways you can fix something. There's no ways you can come up with a good solution if you don't truly and deeply understand the problem. The only way that you can build simplicity is if you understand the need. Uh, so yeah, man, I agree with what you're saying. And I think the last points, I actually want to combine them because I view them as being very similar. So point 6, you say you are a junior UX designer at best. And then point 7 is you probably know far less about UX design than what you think you do. Something that I've seen is quite common, and I've even seen it within myself, is where you think that you're further ahead than what you are. And within the article, you refer to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Could you please tell us a bit about the Dunning-Kruger effect and how you see it relating to the world of UX design?
Yeah, so the Dunning-Kruger effect, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically this chart that highlights that, or it was some research that I believe it was done in the late 90s that highlights that when people don't know very much about a particular subject, they think they know everything. And then the further along they get, the more they realize how much they didn't know. And so you kind of go through this first peak, which is like it's almost like uh, the fake wisdom, when you initially start, and then you quickly realize, oh my God, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And then you go down to what's called the valley of despair. And then the more you learn, you do get a little bit more confident, but it's in this gradual, more realistic slope. And so that's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. And in some of the charts I've even seen where uh, the peak of what you thought you knew that you didn't know is actually higher than, if you're like 20, 30 years in and you're at what's called the plateau of sustainability. If you look at the chart, it'll make more sense as to what I'm talking about. But definitely see a lot of people who are starting out in UX who think they know everything. I've seen, I always look puzzled whenever I'm looking at somebody's profile and then uh, they just graduated from a boot camp or they graduated from school like a year ago and now they've got director of UX on their LinkedIn profile. I'm like, what? Where did that come from? I'm not at that point. I've been in the field for a few years.
Yeah. Um, so like imagine you're listening to you've read this article and you've you've come out of a boot camp or you've come out of a graduate program and you realize that you see a bit of this in yourself. You realize actually like maybe I've been thinking that I know more about UX than what I actually do. So how would you go about recommend bridging the gap between the peak of Mount Stupid? I absolutely love that, and the plateau of sustainability. There's a long process there, but at some point you need to make the decision that you're going to say, actually, I don't want to be a hype-based designer anymore. I don't want to be just regurgitating things without knowing what they actually mean. How would you recommend bridging that gap and taking the first step to becoming more mature and developing a actual UX acumen?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is to be aware of this, to be aware that when you're first starting out, you don't really know everything, and that's perfectly okay. In fact, what I tell people is the first step to enlightenment is to understand and fully come to terms with the fact that with how little you actually know. Um, I remember when I was first starting out, and I actually was aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I was like, I am not going to fall trap to this. I know I don't know very much at this point. I'm okay with that. I'm gonna learn as much as I can, but I'm not gonna be like call myself a UX director saying that, again, like I see a lot of people who call themselves unicorns. They're saying like, oh yeah, I know I can do UX, I can do UI, I can do front end coding. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, okay, what's your background? And they're like, oh, I'm still in my boot camp. Like I mean, for people who've been in this industry for a decade, they still can't do all that stuff, and that's fine. Uh, but yeah, I mean, and I think this is especially valid for yes, for like younger people who might be either coming out of college or transitioning into this career, but then also for people like in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s who may have in their previous career may have been in these very high level positions. They may have been directors, they may have been like a CEO or like run startups or successful startups or something like that. And then they come into this and now they're junior and they're saying, what the hell, this isn't fair. Like, guess what? Life's not fair. Sometimes, if you make a career transition, you got to be able to start out at the bottom rung. Yes, you're going to be able to bring some valuable skills from your previous career, but at the same time, you're not a UX expert at this point.
So personal branding is incredibly important, especially in the modern day. And I think Chris Doe said this incredibly well. Is he says that if there's a couple of people that are marketing themselves in the space, and let's just say you're the expert, and then there's a five juniors. If the juniors are marketing themselves better than you and they're promoting themselves better, they're going to be the ones getting the work. It's up to you to be able to put your work out there and to actually promote yourself. You can't just expect people to come and find you, even though you may have the experience, even though you may have done the hard yards and sort of developed character and discipline and a work experience within the UX field. You need to learn to promote yourself. You need to learn how to put yourself out there. But there's this really sort of tender sort of gap to hold. You don't want to over promote yourself and sort of climb and appear that you're peeking down everyone from Mount Stupid, but at the same time, you also don't want to be overly humble and to come across like, there's Because right now there's so many UX designers who are better than me or better than you, but still you're putting yourself out there. How do you hold this together and how do you promote yourself, but at the same time not come across that you think you know far more than what you actually do?
Yeah, so that's a great point too, because I also do talk to a lot of people who are getting into UX design and they're on the opposite side of the spectrum. They've got this, they've got this sense of imposter syndrome, and they're saying like, "Oh, I don't feel like I'm really competent to be able to do this." What, and it's important to hold a fine balance. You don't want to be on the peak of Mount Stu, but at the same time, you don't want to beat yourself up and say, "I know nothing." It really is about finding that fine balance, because you want to you want to understand why you got here in the first place. What skills are you bringing into UX that are valuable? Like in my case, I actually came from a wildlife sciences background. So that's why I'm very research focused. I'm very much about asking the right questions first and foremost, because that's what I was trained to do in a previous field, but I brought it into UX. And I do believe that people can come from these different backgrounds and bring something of value to it. So what I say is, like, if you're feeling this sense of imposter syndrome or whatever it is, realize what first off, like, why do you want to get into this? Like, what, if you're not getting into this because you want to make money, if you're getting into this because you're really genuinely excited about tech and this career, and then realize that, like, come to terms with that, and then also come to terms with what you're bringing into UX design that's going to make you a successful in this field. Don't discount that, because just because you may have applied to some jobs and they all said no does not mean that you don't have something of value to bring. I really like this quote that says, "You not everybody is going to see your value. Don't let that person be you."
Are there any red flags that you can see? So you mentioned earlier that if somebody's very new in the industry, they can say that, hey, I'm in, like, after 3 years they're a director of something. Are there any things that you as a UX designer, as someone who does a lot of career coaching, are there any patterns that you see people falling into which they just are putting themselves in a higher position than what they should be?
So yes, I will say that I do see people who are trying to probably advance faster than they should. At the same time, though, I look at, like, they start in a little startup where they were actually one of the co-founders and they were really getting their hands dirty. I think that's valid too. Like, if you're in a big major company and you started out as a UX and then you're gradually going to senior and everything, versus somebody who's in a little scrappy startup, I think there is some validity in advancing faster when you're in a little startup, because you're doing so much more than you would like in a big company. At the same time, though, I think, again, it goes back to my point that you got to be humble and realize, like, do what you know. Don't say you know so much more than you actually do.
I really think, like, just being able to be upfront and like be authentic about like what you love, what you hate, what you what you genuinely have experience in, and what you're interested in, and where you would like to be better. I think that those are like simple things that you can get right, but a lot of the times that actually falls through the cracks. So the last question I'd like to talk about is this thing of difference between a junior and a senior UX designer. Could you, in your minds, quickly tell me about what you see as being a junior skill set and a senior skill set, and how you can move between the two?
Yeah, so I would say that the junior skill set would be somebody who's like, they're starting out for the first time, they're learning the ropes. They're probably like assisting on research, assisting on like these design patterns. They might be like, say, adding to, like, if you've got a design library, they might be adding to that. They might be uh, helping to create the wireframes that the senior UX designer has laid out the vision for. And then the senior is more the person who's leading the project. They're the ones uh, who are essentially like taking this shrouded, kind of ambivalent cloud of a problem and then solidifying it into something concrete that they're then working towards. The seniors they're really doing more of the project leadership, at least from what I've seen in my career and my personal experience. And they're the ones who are essentially helping the juniors and the mid-level people.
Okay, that's fantastic. Sam, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of your wisdom. I'm leaving a link to your article in the show notes. People can go ahead and read it. People want to get in touch with you. How could they go about doing that?
Yeah, so they can message me on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/sharperux.
Cool. I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and there's also a link in all my Medium articles at the end, so you can always just click on that link and it'll take you to my page.
Yeah, fantastic. Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for listening. If you learned something from this episode and would like to hear more episodes in the future, please subscribe and consider leaving a comment so that other people can find this content. If you have any questions and would like me to answer them on an upcoming episode, go into the show notes where you can find a link to my Twitter page where you can ask me any questions that you have, or even leave a voice note using the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to keep the user right where they should be, first.